All right, today we're going to unpack a real head scratcher, the cost per lead, or CPL market. Now, on paper, this thing should be a finely tuned machine, a perfect example of efficiency. But in the real world, it's constantly breaking down, teetering on the edge of collapse. We're going to get to the bottom of why. And this is the core mystery, right? You've got this massive, constant demand from buyers who need qualified leads. And on the other side, you have a huge global supply of call centers totally ready to produce them. So, what gives? Why does a market that has everything it needs to succeed just keep failing so spectacularly? Let's dig in. I mean, look at the promise of the CPL market. It's incredible. Stability, the ability to scale up, predictable growth, it's the dream. But the reality for so many people in this space is a total nightmare. We're talking extreme volatility, constant breakdowns, and sometimes complete and total collapse. There's a massive gap between the promise and the reality, and that's what we're going to investigate. So here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at why this market should, by all accounts, work perfectly. Then we'll dive deep and expose the 4 fatal flaws baked into the system. After that, we'll flip the script and see things from the buyer's point of view, unpack the paradox of supply, and then finally talk about how you could actually architect a real solution. Okay, part 1. A market that should work. You know, when things go sideways in this market, it's really easy to point fingers at the usual suspects. Bad management, lazy agents, maybe the training's no good. But what if? What if the real problem is something much, much deeper? And here it is. This is the key. The failures aren't operational, they're systemic and structural. This isn't about people needing to try harder or work smarter. The problem is literally built into the design of the market. The game, as they say, is rigged from the very beginning. So if the structure's broken, what exactly are the flaws? Well, in this next part, we're going to investigate the system's 4 fatal flaws. Think of these as the cracks in the foundation that eventually cause the entire house to come crumbling down. First up, we've got flaw number 1, payment risk. I mean, just imagine this for a second. You do all the work, you deliver an amazing product, and then you have absolutely no idea if or when you're actually going to get paid for it. That's not some weird exception. That is the day-to-day reality in the CPL market. And this isn't just a minor headache. We're talking about things that kill businesses. Payments are always late. Buyers will just issue chargebacks with no discussion. You end up having to settle for partial payments just to get something. Your cash flow is so incredibly volatile that a company that's profitable on paper can go bankrupt just waiting for checks to clear. And this quote just hits the nail on the head. Payment risk is not an operational issue, it is a structural one that requires centralized enforcement. You can't just hire a better accountant to fix this. You need a referee, a central authority to make sure that everybody is playing by the same set of rules. Now, that idea of needing a central authority, it leads us directly to the second flaw, compliance exposure. This is a huge one, especially in regulated industries like insurance. The rules are unbelievably complex, and the penalties for messing up are severe. But the way the market is set up now, it leaves all that risk on the shoulders of individual producers. And the result is a complete and utter mess. You get wildly inconsistent practices, paperwork is missing, agents go off script. All it takes is one single compliance mistake to get an entire campaign shut down, trigger millions in fines, and completely destroy a buyer's trust forever. The risk is just off the charts. Okay, flaw number 3 is buyer dependency. Now, this is a classic mistake in any business, but in the CPL market, it's almost impossible to avoid. What happens is producers end up with all their eggs in one basket, relying on just 1 or 2 big clients for pretty much all of their revenue. And this chart, wow, it just says it all, doesn't it? Take a look. 85% of a company's revenue coming from a single buyer. So what happens when that buyer decides to cut their budget, or change their strategy, or just walks away? Poof, the producer gets wiped out overnight. All that capacity, all those agents just sitting there idle. And this dependency, it just creates this toxic power dynamic. Producers get so desperate to keep that one big client happy that they start to feel pressure to cut corners, maybe bend the rules on compliance a little. And over time, that just erodes trust and makes the whole system even more fragile. It's a downward spiral. And that brings us to our 4th and final flaw, a complete and total lack of standardization. Seriously, imagine trying to build a car where every single part, every bolt, every screw was a different size from a different manufacturer. That's pretty much the CPL market. There are no common standards for anything, not for scripts, not for quality, not for data. The result is pure chaos. Lead quality is all over the place, which means conversion rates are totally unpredictable. For a buyer, this is an absolute nightmare. It forces them to be skeptical, it reinforces all their distrust of the market, and it makes them really, really hesitant to commit to any kind of long-term partnership. So now you can see why just trying harder is never going to work. This table lays it out perfectly. Look, you can go out and hire the best agents on the planet, but that does nothing to solve the structural problem of payment enforcement. You can crank up your call volume, but that doesn't magically create buyer diversification. You can't use operational fixes to solve structural problems. It's impossible. Okay, so we've looked at all the problems. But what does it look like from the other side of the table? Let's shift our focus to the buyer's perspective. And you're going to see that their behavior, it isn't them being difficult. It's actually a perfectly rational response to a market that is fundamentally broken and untrustworthy. And this right here, this might be the single most important insight of this whole explainer. The market isn't small because buyers don't need leads. Oh, they desperately need them. The market's growth is capped because buyers simply cannot find enough partners they can actually trust. The real currency in this market isn't leads, it's trust. And this brings us to a really fascinating paradox on the supply side. You've got all of this production capacity out there, agents and call centers ready to go. But from where a buyer sits, there's a massive shortage of reliable, trustworthy supply. So here's the paradox in a nutshell. There is absolutely no shortage of call centers. There is, however, a massive shortage of call centers that operate inside a governed, reliable, and trustworthy system. See the difference? The problem isn't the players on the field. It's the fact that there's no real playing field with actual rules. Which, at last, brings us to the big one, architecting a solution. If the entire architecture of the market is the problem, then the only real solution is to design a new one from the ground up, using a much, much better blueprint. And this is that new blueprint. Look how it directly addresses every single flaw we identified. Number 1, you centralize selling and collections. Boom, that solves payment risk. Number 2, you centralize compliance and QA. That solves the compliance exposure problem. 3, you institutionalize access to lots of buyers, which solves buyer dependency. And finally, number 4, you govern the data and create standards, which solves the lack of standardization. You're not just patching holes here, you're fixing the entire foundation. So we'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. So often in business, we try to solve problems by fixing the bugs. But what happens when the bugs aren't really bugs at all? What happens when they're actually a fundamental part of the system's original design? Well, then the only real answer is to have the courage to architect something entirely new. Thanks for watching.